want each one of our panelists to sort of talk a little bit for a few minutes about themselves. And then I'd really like to present Ben, who is our survivor here, thank God. And we're going to hear from him. And then really we're such an intimate little group that I'd like to be interactive. And if you have a question, just ask one of the panelists. They're going to just talk and provide you with any and all information that you need. So without further ado, I want to start with, do we just go down, Jody? Do you want to start?
Yeah. So I'm a psychiatric social worker at Beaumont. I work in the ER on the psych unit. I do all the hospital transfers, so anyone comes in to the hospital, I transfer them out if they need inpatient psych, or they come to our unit, which is a voluntary only unit. I do the cases in the ER. When people call, I answer questions. So the community calls. I see kids from 3 years old up to adults 100 years old. And so we're a resource, and we're very busy in our ER and in our hospital. So that's my area of expertise.
I'm Jamie Wittenberg. I'm Jody's brother.
Yeah, this is my brother.
I'm also the judge at the 44th District Court, which covers the cities of Berkeley and Royal Oak. Prior to becoming a judge, I was a prosecutor, handled a number of different cases, but really don't remember as many, heroin-related cases, drug-related cases as I've seen recently since I've been on the bench. And I can say that, the cases involving heroin or prescription medications or things like that, especially with younger individuals, are some of the toughest cases that I see, especially people that end up on probation. To me, very difficult. Usually, people that are on probation to me have been charged with possession of a controlled substance, possession of paraphernalia. Oftentimes the facts of the case are that the person has overdosed or somehow come into contact with the police, and if they've overdosed, obviously they survived, but sometimes they've been charged, and then they are on probation to me, and oftentimes there's relapse, which is part of the recovery. I'll have people that will do well on probation, and some that struggle. Unfortunately, I've had some people that were on probation to me that have died while on probation from overdoses. I've had some people that are very successful that I've kept in touch with even after, that have done very well. I know as Ben has, and I'm very excited to be here with Ben, the other individuals, because when I see it, it's sometimes already too far. When it finally comes to the court, it's already a huge problem usually, and there's only so much I can do. Sometimes it's a threat of jail, which sometimes does work, but really it's got to come from that individual, and it's a lot of prodding and pushing and really trying to get them to get back on track. But for me, it is difficult because it does not discriminate when it comes to age, race, socioeconomic. Anyone can be affected, and everyone at any point in time. And the father of three elementary school, one middle school, but 4 daughters. It terrifies me what's out there. I really am scared from what I see, but I'm hopeful because we've got doctors, pharmacists, everyone that seems to be realizing that this is a serious problem, and I think we can tackle this together, and hopefully there's an answer.
I'm Ben. I am currently Director of Operations at our restaurant entertainment complex. Happily living my life. I am 2.5 years completely clean from a 12-year heroin addiction, and I am going to tell you about that later. But what matters is where I'm at now most, which is alive, and very grateful to be here, to be able to tell your story, or my story. I actually went to this very middle school, so it's somewhat cathartic to, I don't know, kind of get this off my chest in this environment. But yeah, currently I'm a normal 32-year-old person, background in marketing, you know, with a really messed up past. But right now I'm happy and sober and just happy to be here.
Ronnie?
Well, thank you for all coming. Good evening to all of you. My name is Ronnie Fumia. I am a district manager here in Michigan. I've covered over 200 different drugstores in the state of Michigan. Mostly on the management side now. I've been a pharmacist since 1997. This problem didn't start overnight, and it's going to take some time to fix it. This has been going on for decades. We've been hearing a lot of the issues in the news recently, and if you look, so the reason that I am so passionate about this is because a lot of the different things that we see, there's a common theme that we should be aware of. For example, 75 to 80% of heroin addicted individuals, believe it or not, at one point abused prescription painkillers. That's shocking to me. 75 to 80%. If you walk away with any statistics, at one point abused prescription painkillers. That is something that we have to pay attention to. We talk a lot about in terms of trying to give people help. My passion has become preventing people from reaching heroin altogether. During that same time period where people have died, it has quadrupled. The number of deaths have quadrupled from the year 2000 to the year 2015. What's shocking is that same time period, the number of prescription painkillers that were written in that same time period has also quadrupled. There's a lot of drugs out there. So we have to approach this in a different way if we're going to help people. I'm very, very passionate about that. We have to raise awareness, and there's so many different things that we can do as a society to really try to save lives. What's compounded a lot of the issues, and I'll stop talking, is the fact that people have gone from prescription drugs to heroin, and what's happening today is that heroin is being laced with synthetic opioids. Drugs such as fentanyl, which is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, and then carfentanil, which isn't even used in humans. It's an elephant tranquilizer. They're mixing it with heroin, which is up to 10,000 times more potent. So a little speck of carfentanil can cause a person to go into an overdose situation. So it's a serious problem. I'm very lucky to be sitting here listening to a story. We often hear about different things, but it's good to hear a real life example of somebody that's successful and was able to survive. So thank you for coming.
I'm Alex Maggi. I'm an ER physician. I went to Wayne State Medical School, and through my experiences with training, I've been to many of the hospitals in the area, and the opioid epidemic definitely can affect anybody. Don't think you're immune, your family's immune. All walks of life can be affected. Just to expand a little bit more on what he said about how we kind of got here, in the 80s, there were some studies done that said that the opiates might not be that addictive, and so the medical profession started using them a lot for chronic pain and painful conditions, not realizing the addictive potential, and that kind of ballooned. And within the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a push for customer satisfaction, patient satisfaction, and so nobody wants to leave with pain, so they kept using these medicines. They didn't think they were addictive, but we were wrong. It turns out they're very addictive, and happy to be here to help clear that up.
Thank you, Doctor. So Ben,
Sure.
I think we're waiting to hear
Oh,
your story.
all right, let's do it.
Let's do
Let's
it.
get everybody real sad. No, it's uplifting, really. So I guess the best way to do this is basically to do a chronology, and that way you can really see the trajectory, all the steps that lead up to kind of the critical mass and how easily it can start, how quickly it can snowball, and what the results can be. So I went to this very middle school. I had a relatively delinquent childhood but not really. I mean, I was like into punk music and didn't really do anything wrong, but thought I was a rebel and was too politically affiliated for my own intelligence. So I was very on the fringes of society, I thought, but I wasn't really doing anything wrong. I wasn't doing drugs or anything like that. But I did have, I guess, a tinge of anxiety, depression, things like that we were trying to treat my family medically through medication, stuff like that, but nothing that was overwhelming. I went to Berkeley High School. I graduated in 2003, and during my time at Berkeley, I started smoking weed, doing recreational drugs like ecstasy and hallucinogenics and stuff like that. And at the time, I mean, I'll just be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that everybody at Berkeley High School between 1999 and 2003 was smoking weed. I mean, that was just the tradition. So there was no even semblance of what a drug addiction was, or what that meant, or that this could lead to anything. It was just like part and parcel to that counterculture that we were a part of at the time. Now, going back to exactly what Ronnie said, the story starts here. Senior year of high school, somebody had Vicodin, and so we started eating Vicodin because it felt good. There was nothing more to it than that. I mean, it was just at the time, no one knew what that was. You could have said the word opiate to me, and I thought I was pretty well versed on drug language, as a lot of us teenagers were from the internet and stuff like that, but I still didn't know what an opiate was. I knew what heroin was, but I didn't associate Vicodin with heroin. There was no, like, to me, heroin was, you know, junkies in the street, you're gonna die immediately. You know, I had this conception of what it was. So there was no, like, link in my mind between eating a pill that you could find in your grandma's medicine cabinet, or that they give you when you get a tooth pulled, or any time you go to the doctor for anything. I didn't think that it was a big deal. And it wasn't at the time. Flash forward, I end up going to college in Chicago. And my next door neighbor in the dorms had OxyContin. And again, this was 2004, and I'll go into the history of that later. But at the time, OxyContin was, you could probably back this up, widely prescribed, overprescribed, and it was it didn't have an anti-abuse factor to it. Currently, oxycodone has anti-abuse elements. You can't crush it up, you can't shoot it up, you can't use it like that, really. But back then, I mean, OxyContin could be done in any number of ways. First time I took OxyContin, I felt, you know, I'm going to be as realistic with you guys as I can. I felt good. I felt normal. I felt like it had filled some void that had been missing for a very long time, that I can't truly explain now because it's taken me down a rabbit hole where the thought of doing something like that again is just a nightmare. But at the time, that sensation was enough to not make me question doing it the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day, and every day for the next 3 months, with no concept of consequences or what it meant to be addicted to opiates, or that OxyContin was an opiate, or that OxyContin was actually just heroin sold by doctors. I didn't know what that was. So I was taking OxyContin every day, draining my bank account, but that's about it. No real consequences yet, you know, just thought it was something that I did until we ran out of OxyContin. And then I understood what it was to be an addict. I woke up, our hookup on the pills ran dry, and there was no OxyContin. And I woke up and wanted to die. I mean, physically, I was completely dependent on a substance that I didn't even know could make you dependent, because why would I know that? And there's no reason to know that, because it wasn't until it became an epidemic that we're having town halls to discuss this sort of thing. Okay, so in 2004, the idea of taking too many pills and then becoming a junkie wasn't a concept. So I didn't even know what I was feeling. I didn't know what this feeling was. My bones crawling out of my skin, insomnia, throwing up, the flu-like symptoms, all that stuff. I had no concept of what was happening to me. And of course, my friends that had introduced me to this told me, you know, well, you're dope sick. You are going through withdrawal symptoms. And I'd never felt anything like that before. And I was coming off 3 months of being completely numb by taking OxyContin any day. So I said, and I'll remember this day like it was yesterday, I will do anything to make this go away except for heroin. I mean, not literally, like verbatim, that's what I said. And they said, okay, we're going to go find, you know, pills or whatever. And they came back a couple hours later, you know, I'm laying on the couch dying. And they said all we could find was heroin. And I said, give it to me. Because it wasn't, I didn't want to do heroin. There was no part of my brain that, like, at any point wanted to participate in this world, but I was physically ill, and this was the cure. So I did it, and then immediately felt completely fine, and thus sent me on a 12-year-long trajectory into the depths of hell that I will now explain to you. I snorted heroin my first time. It made all my sickness go away, and that's it. Like, I want to be very clear here. At no point after that initial dose of heroin did I do heroin to get high. I just want to make everybody understand that, okay? There is not a single heroin addict that does heroin to catch a buzz, okay? Every single person that shoots heroin, snorts heroin, smokes heroin is doing it because if they didn't, they couldn't function. That's just a fact. Like, yeah, you nod out, yeah, you get a little high, but the reality is, if you could stop, you would. Like, it's not good enough to go through all the stuff that you have to go through. So you start down this path because if you stopped, you can't go to work. If you stop, you can't raise your kids. If you stop, you can't go to school. If you stop, you throw up. So you just keep going. But in keeping going, it just gets worse, which is exactly what happened. So I'm still in Chicago. Now I got a heroin habit in Chicago. You know, and I'm like doing this with a couple of my friends. None of us know anything about this world. I mean, we're going to the south side of Chicago to try to cop dope in Cabrini Green projects. Okay, like, I should have died then. I had no idea what we were doing. I got completely wrapped up in this world and eventually started injecting it. That's just the next step. And it's the next step because when you go down that road, there's no part of a rational brain left. You're not thinking about consequences. You're not thinking about anything beyond your next bag of dope. So the next rational step was, how can I maximize my money that I don't have? So if I only have $20, what can I do to get more out of that $20 so I don't have to go steal more stuff to get more heroin? And the answer was, of course, you just put a needle in there. Obviously, that's the most rational thing you could do, which is exactly what I did. And things started to fall apart almost immediately after that. For a while, I would consider myself a functional addict, even though I completely wasn't. But then once you start putting a needle in your arm, it's all over. So this basically takes us into the rest of the downward spiral. That was the first time that I came clean to my parents about my problem. My parents came to Chicago because they sensed something was wrong. Maybe somebody told them something was wrong. I never actually got that whole story, but they took me to a therapist who essentially convinced me to tell my parents that I, had a problem. And I don't remember, but I think I lied to them and told them I had a problem with pills. I don't think I had the courage to tell them I was on heroin. But they packed me up, they took me home, and I was in rehab the next day. So I went to resort rehab, which was Brighton. Or no, sorry. I went to so many rehabs that it's like it's all a blend of my reality. And it's not funny, it's a really true, sad story. I've been to 11 rehabs, okay? The first time I went to Maple Grove, which is in West Bloomfield, and it's a resort. And I go there, and my mindset was, oh, this is it. So like I was a heroin addict, and now I go to rehab, and now I'm not. Great, problem solved. So on my 9th day of rehab, first time ever going, I had it in my mind that I had it licked, everything's great, I'm seeing pink clouds, it's all fantastic. And then all of a sudden my stomach starts to really hurt. Something's wrong. I go to the front desk, I tell them over and over something's wrong, and they keep telling me it's just withdrawal symptoms, blah, blah, blah. Until I collapse in the front lobby of Maple Grove. They take me in an ambulance across the street to Henry Ford Hospital, and my appendix is about to explode. So what do? They immediately shoot me up with like 14 milligrams of Dilaudid to send me into surgery and send me home with a bottle of Vicodin directly after my rehabilitation. And so that was kind of a wash, I'm assuming you can all guess. I stayed okay for like a month because I was on bed rest. I didn't know anybody because I had just gotten back from Chicago, where I've been living for like the last 4 years. And from there, I can just keep going on and how it all happens. It's really quite simple. Your brain doesn't develop enough time between use if you're not clean for more than a year, in my opinion, and probably medicine's opinion, to combat the type of triggers that can occur in early recovery. And basically, I was at a Starbucks or something 3 months after my surgery, 3 months after getting out of my 9-day rehab stint, ran into somebody from rehab, and I mean, it was as simple as this, and I want to be very clear. Hey man, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. You staying clean? Yeah. But there was a look in each of our eyes that was like, no, you're not. No, you're not. Get home. An hour later, call them, and I said, you want to go grab? And that was it. I mean, it was simple. There wasn't like a should I do it? Should I not? It was like a completely intrinsic, instinctual response to the simplest trigger that could ever happen. And I was so early in my recovery that I hadn't developed any skills to battle that kind of physiological response to what they call a trigger. And I want to stop here really quick and just explain something before I get into the really dark parts of this, because we're not even, this is like the rosy stuff. I just want to warn everybody. I came from a loving, fully functioning, upper middle class Huntington Woods family. I suffered no abuse, no psychological trauma, no anything that most doctors, psychologists, addictionologists would associate with as the common denominator amongst addicts, okay? I went to Roper, for God's sakes, and then I went to Burton, and then I went to Norrup, and then I went to Berkeley, and then I went to college. I just want to make this clear that I am any one of your kids, okay? It doesn't matter where you come from. And before I go on, I just want you all to keep that in mind as I continue. So I go down that road. I'm back on dope. I'm shooting up all the time. Now I'm using heroin in Detroit, which is a whole different monster. I go back to rehab. I go to Brighton for 30 days now. I got a solid 30 under my belt. And then my parents, who are amazing people, found a program called Red Cliff Ascent, which is this wilderness therapy program, and I was given this insane privilege of going out to the desert in Utah for like 6 months and surviving on nothing but like sticks to make fire, and it was this amazing therapy program, and every part of my soul was committed to never touching drugs again after this experience. It had awakened something in me, it had enlightened me, it had changed the very core of who I was, I thought. So if you're doing the math, that's 30 days in rehab, 6 months in a wilderness therapy program, and the mindset of a rock. Like, I'm never going to do this again. However, when I left rehab, I was put on long-term Suboxone maintenance. I don't know if you guys know what Suboxone is, but it is a opiate deterrent system. It's essentially a opiate blocker so that you can't get high if you use it, but it also has an opiate called buprenorphine in it, which basically balances you out. So it's prescribed heroin, essentially. I mean, that's what it is. At the time, they were prescribing this for long-term use, where I was taking 16 milligrams of Suboxone every day, including while I was in Utah. I didn't abuse it. I was taking it as prescribed, but here's the reality. It's still an opiate, and opiates get you physically dependent. So I thought I was doing great. I was going to meetings. I was clean. I met a girl. This girl and I moved in together. We had a very toxic relationship, and she started actually abusing my Suboxone to get high off of, which you can very easily do. Meaning, this, what is this? What's the Suboxone? Schedule 2 narcotic?
No, it's not Schedule 2. It's a combination, as he said, of a drug that's a partial agonist, a
Right.
drug that's like an opiate, and
But,
an antagonist.
but you can't go to a pharmacy to refill your prescription before it's due. So if I was short 7 days worth of Suboxone, that meant I was about to go into 7 days worth of legitimate heroin withdrawal, because all Suboxone is doing is delaying this inevitable dope sickness that you absolutely will have if you just stop taking Suboxone cold turkey, just like you have if you stop taking heroin cold turkey. So after a year of intense therapy, going to Narcotics Anonymous, going to other meetings, going to rehab for 30 days, being on Suboxone, I ran out of Suboxone 7 days before I could refill it, was completely dope sick just like I was when I was on heroin, and I can't go get Suboxone off the street, so what did I do? You know, I went right back to where I was. At this point, I had gotten myself a real peachy job. I was working for a nonprofit as a social media strategist. I had a salary. I had a brand new car. I was living in a really nice house in Detroit. I had it all together. Like, I was on the Suboxone and all that. I was doing great. And then within, I would say, maybe my parents can back me up on this, 2 weeks of starting to use heroin again, I had gotten fired, gotten evicted, had $0 to my name, sold literally every possession, including an iPad, for 4 packs of heroin, which is $40. Okay, I didn't sell the iPad to somebody for money. I gave this drug dealer an iPad, and he gave me 4 packs of heroin, which is enough to get me through for 6 hours. So I just want to put that in perspective. A brand new iPad, which back then was $800 or something like that. So that was like the beginning of that. So within 2 weeks, I had literally nothing. I was completely destitute. I had to move back in with my parents. I was a struggling addict. I got my Suboxone prescription refilled, so I was switching off between, if I had money, I'd go get heroin. If I didn't have money, I'd take my Suboxone. Just completely destroying my parents' lives inside their house. And then eventually they sent me to a 3-quarter house, you know, which is like a sober living environment. I detoxed, I went there, and I was doing okay. And then I met Shireen. Shireen became the mother of my son, and the worst mistake that ever happened to me. Shireen is now dead. She died of a heroin overdose while I was in prison. And my son and her daughter live with her mom. And I will never be able to be a father to my son again because the courts have said so. So that's the end of that story, and let's tell you how we got there. So I met Shireen at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Not a good place to meet chicks, I found out. She was married. She had a house. She had a daughter who was 3, but her husband and her were separated, and she was clean, and I was a real easy target. And I was very eager to move out of the 3-quarter house and present myself as an upstanding adult. So you know what? Let's be together. I'm going to move into your house while you're still married, and I'm going to help you raise your daughter, which I did for 6 months. And I did a pretty good job, and we were clean, and everything was great. And then she got pregnant with my son, and it all kind of fell apart from there. And I know that a lot of people are going to think just terrible things about me, and that's okay because I was a terrible, terrible person, and so was she. And we together were the most terrible people that have ever existed. She used heroin every day of her pregnancy. And I really don't like talking about that, but it's a reality and it needs to be discussed. My son was born perfectly healthy, with absolutely no withdrawal symptoms, with no addiction, with no cognitive difficulties. It was a miracle, a legitimate miracle that I didn't deserve, and neither did she. But that boy was born perfectly. And that should have changed everything, because the day that she went into labor was the scariest day of my entire life, because I knew that they were going to take that kid away from us. I knew what she'd been doing. I know what we've been doing. I knew what our lives were at that point. And they didn't take Ezra away from us, because he was perfectly fine. But it also didn't stop us from living the life that we were living. We were so entrenched in our addiction that we couldn't even appreciate the miracle that we'd been given. We couldn't appreciate the fact that this boy, who should have been born into hell, had come out perfectly fine. We couldn't appreciate that we'd been given a second chance. We couldn't see past any of it. And it didn't stop us at all. We just kept using. I, however, did go to rehab when my son was born. I couldn't do it anymore. I needed to change. She did not. And while I was in rehab, she started a crack addiction while she was taking care of both of our children, and I was trying to get clean, and I ended up leaving rehab to be with her because we were about to get evicted from our house, which happened. So now we are 2 heroin addicts, 1 heroin and crack addict, 2 children, 1 of which is a newborn, and we're homeless. Luckily, our mother-in-law let us live in her house in a bedroom, where we shared a bedroom with a 4-year-old girl and my newborn son and Shireen and I. And that's where we lived. And that was essentially our flop house. Let me also backtrack and tell you that in that time, even though I was a junkie and a real piece of shit, I was able to finagle my way into a real peachy job. I was making like $70,000 a year working as the social media strategist for DTE Energy. Had an office on the 24th floor. I could see into Comerica Stadium. I had 2 supervisors beneath the CEO. I mean, I was a corporate executive. And I did a good job because I'm smart. I'm too smart. I'm so smart that I got myself into this situation. Now, I didn't see a dime of that money because my first paycheck I took immediately to a check advance place, and got a $2,000 payday advance loan before I even got my first paycheck, and then that's where we were every single time I got paid, was $2,000 in the hole. So I'm working a $70,000 a year job, in debt, have no money, have 2 kids, I'm homeless, I'm living with her mom, and then I get fired, obviously, because you can't maintain that life. I was shooting heroin in the corporate offices of DTE Energy in the bathroom on my lunch break. You know, I mean, this is where I was. So now we're homeless. We have our 2 kids. And now her mom is moving. And now we're really homeless. Now we don't have anywhere to go. And I just want to keep saying that throughout all of this, none of this stopped us, no matter what our trouble was for that day. Not one thing stopped us from going and getting our heroin. It didn't matter how terrible and tragic our daily lives were. We had to go get it. And I want to say again, the reason we had to go get it wasn't because we liked getting high. It was because we had 2 kids to take care of. I had a corporate executive job and a life to maintain. And you can't do that when you're shivering and shaking and can't sleep and are throwing up and have the flu and your bones are crawling out of your skin. None of this is an excuse. It's just the reality. I just want everybody to understand that when you see somebody struggling with this, it's not because they're losers or they have a moral deficiency or they want to get high. It's because they cannot live without it. It's just a fact. I would look in my son's eyes and every part of myself wanted to stop doing what I was doing, but I also knew that I had to change his diapers. And I also knew that I couldn't be dope sick with 2 kids in the house. It's a real double-edged sword. And it was a consequence of choices that I'd made, but the choices that I'd made became non-choices. I no longer had a choice. There was no choice. So now my kids are taken away from me. I brought my son to my parents' house because the relationship with Shireen and I was a complete and utter toxic, disgusting catastrophe. She had become basically a prostitute on the streets. And I was holding a sign at 696 in Woodward to get money every day. So obviously we couldn't care for these children. I took my son to my parents' house. Her daughter was taken to her father's house, and the courts got involved and took my kids away. And they should have. That didn't stop me. All it did was enable me to continue down the path that I had gone on. And that path led me to go beyond, I've been using for 10 years now and never had a run-in with the law. Not one single incident. I'd never had handcuffs put on me. I'd never gotten a ticket. I've never gotten caught doing anything. And I thought, great, it's never gonna happen to me. And that's the one thing that I was scared of. I wasn't scared of death. I wasn't scared of anything. I was really scared of going to jail. But it just never happened. Until it did. Because it will. And that's how it goes. I stole from people who were very important to me, and those people are my parents. I wrote myself a check out of my dad's checkbook for $200-something. I wrote it to me, forged his signature, took it to a bank, thought nothing of it. I thought if he finds out, he's going to be pissed. And then I got arrested for a 14-year felony for writing my name on a check. It's called forgery, and they can put you away for a really, really long time. Now, I want you all to understand that what happened was I went to my parents' house under the guise of seeing my son, but really it was to go and steal more checks. And when I got there, the Huntington Woods police were there too. And my mom wouldn't answer the door, and I had no idea what was going on. And the cops put me in handcuffs and put me in the car. And, you know, this sounds embarrassing, but from my perspective, I was like, oh, it's the Huntington Woods cops. I'm from Huntington Woods. Nothing's gonna happen to me. It's just a check. You know, my dad will get me out of this, whatever. And, you know, I asked the cops, like, what am I being charged with? And they said, well, forgery felony, 3 counts. I had my dad's ATM card on me, so that's illegal possession of a transaction device. It's 4 years. And then they also found a pack of heroin on me, so that's possession. Now, if you're keeping track, me sitting in the car thinking, this is nothing. I just got 5 felonies at once. I'd never even been arrested. And I still have 5 felonies on my record from one mistake. You know, a mistake that I wish I could take back, but in the end it saved my life. Because here's what happens when you get into the legal system. You go to jail. When you go to jail, they don't have heroin in jail. I don't know if you guys know that. But you don't get to do heroin. You get to lay on a concrete floor until you get placed on a mat for 7 to 9 days, completely detoxing cold turkey from a drug you've been doing on the streets all day, every day for the last 10 years. That's a real quick wake-up call. Detoxing in jail was the worst thing that I ever went through. So that was my first time in jail. Before I even went to jail, you get arraigned. And I had no concept of the legal system at the time. Now I have a really good concept. I could be a lawyer. I really understand it now. But at the time, I didn't know what any of the terminology. I didn't know what arraigned was. I didn't know what a bond was. I didn't know what sentencing was. I didn't know the difference between circuit court and district court, because why would I? Who cares? I didn't go to law school. I didn't need to know that kind of stuff. Well, now I need to know it, because it became my whole world from that moment on, was the courts and jail and cops. That was it. I went from being a heroin addict to being a criminal in 1 millisecond. And being a criminal and a heroin addict are 2 very different things. Very different things. Because you're not treated like a heroin addict anymore. They don't give a shit that you're a heroin addict. Except that they kind of do. And here's what happened. I go in front of the judge for my arraignment, and she lists, my charges. She says, 1 count of forgery, 18 months to 14 years. And I'm standing there just like, what did she just say? Did she just say years? 14 years? 2 counts of forgery, 18 months to 14 years. And my heart is just like, I'm done. Like, it's over. 3 counts of forgery, 18 months to 14 years. Unlawful possession of a transaction device, 4 years. Possession of heroin, 2 years. And in my mind, because I don't understand anything, I'm like, well, that's like 70 years. Like, I'm going to be in prison for 70 years. I mean, really, that's not how it works. But that's what I thought. And then I had my unemployment check that I had my girlfriend Shireen hold on to, which was $300 cash. So I turned myself, they let me go to the hospital because I was detoxing in Huntington Woods Police Station. They let me go to the hospital. They said, turn yourself back in tomorrow. So I give Shireen $300 because what do I know? And I said, I'm going to go turn myself in so it looks good on my record, and then you come and bail me out with $300. And the judge says, your bail's $25,000 cash. And I said, so 300 is not going to cover it? And that was it. And I said, okay, well, I said to the cop, like, what do I do? He says, you wait for county to come pick you up and you sit in jail till sentencing, which was 4 months later. And then I went to sentencing, and you know what? They do care that you're an addict, because the judge looked out for me. She gave me she let me go after 4 months in jail. She sent me to jail rehab, share house, Macomb, for 3 months. And it was all really good. I got really healthy. I was working out. I was eating really good in rehab. Again, it was the same thing. Like, my whole brain flipped. My whole mind flipped. Except for one thing. I called Shireen every day from jail. And I decided that we were going to make it work because she got clean while I was in jail. She didn't. And the day I got out of share house, I go to report to probation for my first day on probation. I told them my whole plan. Shireen took me to probation. And then we went immediately to get heroin. So now I'm back out there. And now it's worse than it's ever been. Because now not only am I homeless, not only am I back on heroin, not only am I jobless, not only am I a criminal, but now I'm absconding from probation. So every second of my life is just this nightmare of looking over my shoulder, getting heroin, looking over my shoulder, stealing stuff to get heroin, looking over my shoulder. I mean, it was literally a living hell in every sense of the word. I got arrested holding a sign on 696 in Woodward for obstructing traffic. So it's legal to hold a sign, but it's not legal to go get the money, just in case you guys are interested in holding signs. You gotta be careful with that, because they'll get you. So I got arrested for that. They looked me up and they were like, oh, we've been looking for you. So back to jail I go. Judges do care. They gave me a second chance. They put me in adult treatment court. Adult treatment court, for those of you that don't know, is an incredibly stringent, strict probation system for drug abusers. It can be a godsend or it cannot be. It depends on the person. There is no blame on the court system at all. There's no blame on judges, juries, prosecutors, lawyers. It doesn't matter. It is up to you. Because when you go to jail, you're clean when you come out. So you have a choice. If you're in active addiction, every day is not a choice. You don't have a choice. It's out there, you're sick, you go get it. When you go to jail, you've been clean. Well, the day you get out, you have a choice to make, okay? So jail can save your life. And when you get out and then they put all these restrictions on you, now you've been given an even more deep level of understanding of how to stay clean. So here I am on adult treatment court. I have to, drug test twice a day. I'm living in a halfway house. I'm jumping through all these hoops. But in the meantime, I'm still in this relationship with this person who got our kids taken. Got our kids taken away together. She's been using dope the entire time. And I just want to reiterate, I'm not in any way placing any blame or accountability on her. It's just that it's such a massive part of the story. And the reason it's such a huge part of the story is because it's not always about your choices. It's about the people that you associate with. It's about the environment that you're with. Your children are going to associate with people and make decisions that might not be drug related, but they will contribute to their choices. So it's not that Shireen made me do drugs. It was that I made choices that put me in a position to continue to use. So now I've gone completely off the rails because now I'm absconding from drug court. The reason I went off the rails is because when you fail drug court, you go to prison. Drug court is a alternative incarceration program. It means that your guidelines are state guidelines, meaning you go to prison, or you can do adult treatment court, complete it, and you'll stay out of prison. So you miss 3 court dates or whatever, it's basically like when you get caught, you're gonna go to prison. And that's where I was. I was running from the system, knowing that the second that I see police lights, I'm going directly to state penitentiary. Not county jail, where you have an out date, not rehab, prison. I didn't like that. So I ran and I hid. And by running and hiding, I mean I was a rat in the sewers. I was scum of the earth, the type of people that you wouldn't even give $1 to because you felt bad about. I mean, I was as homeless and destitute and just disgusting as you could even imagine, because there was nowhere I could go. I was just a fugitive trying to get $20 a day together so that I could stop being sick. That was my life. And then I got arrested. I don't remember why. I was with somebody and we got pulled over. It doesn't matter, because I was so freaking relieved when he put me in the back of that cop car. I was relieved. It was over. You know, it sounds disgusting to think that knowing that you're about to go to prison is a relief, but it's so much better than the life that I was living. So they take me to county. I get sentenced. My mom was in the sentencing room. And I don't know if she remembers this, but the judge said 18 months to 14 years MDOC, which is you're going to prison for at least 18 months or up to 14 years. And I smiled. And I said to my mom as I walked out, I said, see you in 14 years. But it was snide and it was insensitive, but there was honestly a part of me that was like, at least I'm alive, and at least I don't have to do this anymore. You know? So I went to prison. We're not here to talk about prison. I'm not going to tell you prison stories, but the reality of it is that it completely saved my life. Because I've been clean since the day I got out of prison on April 4th, 2015, right? I mean, or 2015, I don't know. I've been clean since that day, and I've been clean since the day they put me in handcuffs. And if I wouldn't have gone to prison, I for sure would be dead. Not like exaggerating for the sake of the story, like I would not be talking to you. Because every single person that I know is dead that used heroin. The mother of my child is dead. My best friend, Brian Miller, died of a heroin overdose not 6 months ago. Everybody that I went to rehab with is dead. Every person that does this is dead. And every time I go on Facebook, there's another person dying. To the point where it's like I'm desensitized to it. I don't have a reaction to it anymore. And it's only when I tell the story that I even feel connected, because I am such a different person now, because I've distanced myself from that lifestyle so much that I don't even relate to that human being anymore. That is how far from who I was that I am now. But the reason that I tell the story isn't to scare people. It's not to get sympathy. It's not to get praise. It's not for any other reason other than it needs to be told, because this shit can happen to literally anybody. There is no discerning it. I've seen, it happen to the people you'd expect it to happen to, and I've seen it happen to the people that you would never expect it to happen to. But I am so grateful that I'm here to tell my story today, and hopefully, I don't know who all of you people are. I don't know what your relation to this epidemic is. I don't know how you relate to the community, but if one thing can be taken from this, it's that let's do three things. One, if somebody you know is struggling with this, there is hope that they can change. However, it will probably come from a very extreme source. My parents were put in a position, I'll never forget this day, and this is an anecdote. Wow, I'm sorry. I've been talking for a really long time. I apologize. I was homeless. It was freezing cold outside. Shireen had just gotten arrested. I was running away from the security guards at Meyer's. I got caught shoplifting. I had no money. I was starving. I walked from 8 Mile to Huntington Woods. I sat on my parents' back porch until they woke up, shivering, because I wanted them to let me in so I could either get warm or steal something or whatever. And my parents had to do the hardest thing that they ever did, which was finally put their foot down and say, no, we can't let you in our house. And my mom gave me a hot cup of tea outside. My dad passed me a cordless phone and said, call somebody. Now, I can't begin to imagine how that felt for them. But I know that it was the right thing to do. So for those of you that are dealing with somebody that's going through this, it's going to take suffering on both sides. It's going to take an extreme tidal wave of aggression to get past this. But there's hope. And the only alternative to hope is literally institutions, jail, and death. And I don't mean to be cliche, but that's just the way that it is. It ends 3 ways unless it changes. And it's with jails, institutions, and death. And that's just the way it is. The other thing is that if somebody is in this position, it's not because, and I know a lot of you don't feel this way, and that's good. It's not because they have a moral deficiency. It's not even because it's a a sickness or a chronic disease. Some doctors say that it is, and I've done a lot of research. Physiologically, it actually is. But it's because they're in a pattern of behavior that cannot be stopped unless it is stopped by something else. It's not like we'll just stop doing it. Like, do you really think that that I could have just stopped? After you've heard all of that, do you think that there was ever a moment where I was just like, man, you gotta chill with this. Like, you should probably not do this anymore. That happened every second of every day, but it doesn't work. Yeah.
How long were you in jail last time?
In prison. I was in prison. I got really lucky. I did 6 months in prison and then was released early to go to boot camp. So only 9 months altogether. So I was super lucky. But
Did you get Suboxone in prison?
no. I haven't been on any sort of maintenance medication since that last time I was on Suboxone. They don't get
You were in for 9 months? Is that?
9 months total. But I've been in jail over the last 2 years, probably a total of almost a year and a half.
Yeah, the last time.
Yep. But they don't give you anything in jail. They don't even give you ibuprofen. So you got to do it on your own. But yeah, that's a good question.
So you were lucky, for sure.
I was very lucky. I mean, I was very lucky. I could have been in there for a really long time.
There's a difference between prison and jail.
Yeah.
So I don't know if people are aware of that.
Jail is where you go for misdemeanors or when you're awaiting sentencing for a felony. So prison is where you go if you have longer than a year on your sentence. Jail is less than a year, or they, I mean, Jamie could probably answer this better, but there's, elevated felonies or elevated misdemeanors, but nobody is doing more than a year in jail typically, unless they're in trial or awaiting sentencing. Once you get sentenced for a felony, you generally go to prison.
Exactly. What location of prison?
I went to 2. I was at Parnell, which is in Jackson, and then I went to Coldwater. It's called Lakeview. Lakeview, by the way, Lakeview is the last place I was at was a level 2, which is where they send lifers. So my bunkie, my person that I slept above, had been in prison since he was 17. He had juvenile life sentence. He was 69 years old. He murdered his parents. So you never really think when you're young that you're going to end up like playing spades with a murderer, but the choices send you that way. Yeah.
Is there any hope that the institutions that you went to before you made it to prison work for
Yes.
other people?
If they, in my opinion, if they change their approach to medication, because I think that the issue was that they relied, this was back in the day, they relied too heavily on Suboxone, methadone, that type of stuff. Yeah, now they have alternatives like Vivitrol, which it's not an opiate, it's an opiate blocker only. But I also think that it goes back to, a lot of times when you go on private insurance, you're doing a week, 14 days, that's just not enough. It's not even close to enough. So when you go to rehab on the state's dime, when the courts send you to rehab, you're doing 90 days. So then you really have a chance. But if you're going on Blue Cross Blue Shield, I mean, I don't see that as being effective.
Right, or the county.
Or the county.
And that's something to add to what Ben is saying. When we have patients that come into the hospital, we cannot force someone to go to rehab. We cannot, like I can commit someone for mental health, I can send someone to a psych unit, I can help them with that. I cannot make that decision for someone for rehab. We can help set it up, but they have to make that call. They have to want to go to rehab. That is the one thing I can't help people with. I can start the process, but I can't do anything for rehab.
And I just want to say, I don't want to scare anybody into thinking there's no hope beyond the prison system, but there is hope with rehab if it's done in this extremely holistic way. There is no hope if you just think that you can throw somebody in Brighton for 30 days and then expect them to come out cured, because A, there's no cure, it's chronic, and there's so many other elements that have to go into it, right? I mean, I've gone to rehab and had a year clean. I've gone to rehab and had 6 months clean. I've gone to rehab and had 24 hours clean. It all depends on where you're at in your addiction and what your environment is when you emerge. But I do think there's a lot of alternatives out there that I don't think we've even begun to explore because we were so heavily medicating people. And I think that created a real problem. the only solution to heroin addiction for the last 30 years was methadone. That's it. Methadone's 10 times worse than heroin.
So, I mean, to me, this is a prime example of why I'm so passionate about preventing people from getting to that point of reaching to needing heroin, right? So look at all the stuff that goes into what is happening in society today, that we reach the point where people are progressing to heroin. That's where my focus is, educating people, getting drugs out of the home. People leave, they're, as you said, went in for surgery, they gave them a 40-count bottle of Vicodin. Well, guess what? That's nothing. We have people that are getting 180 counts each month, 100 counts, and these are all going right to the home. If people go into surgery, they're getting a 90-count bottle of Vicodin. They might use 5 tablets. Guess what? The rest is going into the medicine cabinet, sitting there. So we got to look at the root causes, and really, I mean, this is a prime example of that progression of reaching heroin. We got to help people stop from reaching that point.
And it does, I just want to emphasize what you just said. There's no, I don't, and I know a lot of heroin addicts, I've heard the stories. I've never heard of any heroin addiction that doesn't start with a progression. I don't know a single person who is just like, I'm going to shoot heroin today.
Like, today's the day I'm gonna go shoot heroin.
It
Yeah,
just
no.
doesn't happen, and it only starts with opiates that are readily available. So, are there more questions? Oh, sorry. How about back there and then I'll come over.
I just wondered, do you go to any support system now?
Do I currently?
Yeah.
This is my support system,
Right.
like sharing my
So
story.
you're-
I used to go to a lot of NA. This sounds bad. I think NA is really good for a lot of people, but it's played a bizarre role in my life given the social structure of it, and I've found support in other ways, you know, but I think it's really helpful and important in early recovery, but I also think it's really important to do stuff like, for me to do stuff like this, because it reminds me, like
Because
this
you
just,
tell your story.
yeah, like I've just been recharged on sobriety for like another 6 years by reminding myself of what I went through. I'm being serious, like if I just never do this, it's gonna, like your addiction always lives inside you, so like if you ignore it, it's gonna get you. But if I do this, I'm like, oh, I'll like get in my car after this to go back to work and be like, wow, that really sucked. Like I don't really want to do that again, and I'll be good for another, like 6 years. Yeah.
So, as a parent, what would be your advice for parents? I mean, my children are still very small, and hopefully I have a long time before I have to worry about
Right.
any of this. They're 6 and 3, but, as they get into high school and further on, like, what would be your advice? If you could have given your parents, let's say, advice, or, was there something that they could have done early on to catch it?
Exactly what you're doing right now by sitting here. That's the only thing. I mean, it's just education. My parents didn't know anything. Why would they know anything about this, right? I mean, it's about education because there's really nothing else you can do, right? And it's also about destigmatizing it for your children. So understanding that there's causality, like there's a reason that they are, if it ever, for your sake, I hope and pray it never ever would come to that, but if there's ever suspicion or concern, that you present it in a way of support and instead of anger or fear.
Right.
But beyond that, it's about understanding like the facts of all of this, and like coming here is like the most proactive thing that you could do. Like I said, like the reason I tell the story isn't to like be cool, it's because I really think that it's valuable for parents to have a deeper understanding beyond what they read in Newsweek, beyond what they see on TV shows. Like,
Like a scare tactic.
yeah, there's
Right?
there's way more to it than that.
Like-
There's a whole
yeah.
psychology of it.
But scaring kids, I think like when we were growing up, it was like, they scare you, right? But
Yeah.
where are the facts, where,
We had
right? Like the scared straight, that doesn't work.
No, I remember it at Nora Middle School. I had personal development class with Miss Guevara. I'll always remember that. I swear.
Not you.
Well, no, is she still here? I don't know. Really? Are you serious? Oh, well, Miss whatever, and they played us like a video that was, we were 13 years old, 12 years old, and it was like, if you smoke pot, you'll die.
Right.
And it's and all that does is then we knew that wasn't true, and all it does is make you then negate all the other stuff you hear because you're like, well, that's BS. So you just like ignore all the other stuff, and then you just start to be desensitized to the message, right? So it's about factual intervention, like, you know what I mean. Sorry, I just wanted to get to.
I wanted to add to that, I'm sorry. a lot of it too is coping skills. I think growing up, most of us never knew what coping skills were, and just to kind of insert in like TCC, that's something that we do at Anderson, is that we actually teach kids like emotional coping and different things like that. Growing up, we didn't have that. You guys, you know, the older generation here didn't have that, and I think it's a new portion of psychology and sociology, and if that's something that you don't know or don't have experience with, Google it. You know, coping skills, you'll learn a lot.
I just wanted, you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, first of all, I wanted to honor you for getting to where you got to, and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you very much.
Just at the last stage, like what would you say changed after prison? Because you had been, as you mentioned, through many different, even a year clean, and somehow it just didn't click. What would you say changed and made that
This sounds super bad, but Shireen died while I was in prison. So not that that solved anything, but it allowed me to move on from kind of you know, something that was really holding me back. And prison was a very intense experience, and boot camp, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I treasure my experience at boot camp. It sounds silly, but I swear to you, it awakened a sense of structure and integrity and discipline in me that I didn't have before, because I'd been going so far along with just being this, you know, just not great person. And when, even though boot camp sucks, like it's supposed to suck, it sucks. But when you leave, you feel empowered a little bit. So I do think that like there's programming inside that has, if you are keen to open your mind to certain aspects of it, I feel like it helps. But I will say, Shireen passing away was probably a huge element of my ability to come out. That was in the beginning, and now it's that I've created a lot of support systems and honesty. I'm way more honest with my parents about everything now, and I have a better relationship with my family, and just I've built up from that. So it was like just getting out, having nothing, but being like, I don't want to do that again. So I couldn't really put my finger on it. It was probably a bunch of things. Sorry.
Directed to doctor and pharmacy, what kind of education when you were going to medical school did you have relative to prescription and the dangers, possibly pharmacy as well? Because you hear these anecdotal about in communities where it's thousands, millions of opioids or whatever being prescribed. Very insidious. How do you break that? And do medical schools now need to do things differently as far as pharmacy?
So there's been a huge shift in medical education in regards to opiates. Nowadays, you have to have continuing education in pain management. There's a much more emphasis on alerting patients to the risk of potential with these medicines. It night and day.
Yeah, I think for me, I've been practicing as a pharmacist since 1999. I saw this way back then. There was a drug, Vicodin ES, which they removed off the market. It had 750 milligrams of acetaminophen, which is Tylenol, and people were just pumping this up to 12, 15, 20 tablets a day, killing livers as well. There was a shift as we went on, and there were many factors that led to why we got here today. Back then in the mid-1990s, there was a drug manufacturer, which I'm not going to mention today, that was heavily pushing to thousands and thousands of physicians. And they were promoting that these drugs were only 1% chance of addictive potential. Their patient population that they used for that study was 6 patients. That's it. They sent this literature out to 15 to 20,000 physicians, saying that there's a very low chance of addiction and these drugs should be used more for pain. And the doctor mentioned pain being used at a 5th vital sign. So you saw this huge spike in these drugs hitting the market. Today, there's a lot of good things that are happening. There's more awareness, for sure. And 2, the laws are changing. So, for example, in July of 2018, a doctor cannot prescribe any more than a 7-day supply of an opioid drug if it's used for acute pain. No more. That's going to be the law. They're going to require all physicians, if they write for an opioid prescription this summer, starting this summer, that they have to check the registry, it's called MAPS, that we have available, to see if a person has received the prescription for a controlled substance of this nature passed. They have to do that. Today, only 31% of doctors use that system, believe it or not.
So we can see controlled substance prescriptions that have been filled.
Yeah.
But the physician needs to have a login with the state of Michigan. You need to apply for it. So the law is changing where it's going to be required that you have to do that before you prescribe opiates.
Yeah. Huge wins.
Whereas now, you don't have to do that.
Is that the same for dentists and?
Everyone. Yep.
Yeah. You're going to have to be able to prescribe any controlled substances starting this summer. The doctor has to register for MAPS. And this came out of Governor Schneider's task force. He put together a task force this year, an opioid task force, and that's one of the recommendations that came through. So there's a lot of things that are coming to light, but it's taking people to die to what's happening with this. There was another huge win as well. I'm going to let you guys know about this as well. Naloxone, the antagonist for opioids. So if someone takes an opioid, injection with heroin, they go into an overdose, naloxone, which is also known as Narcan, the nasal version, and Vizio, the injection version, is now available like over the counter at any pharmacy that's registered in the state of Michigan. So anybody can walk up to the counter and say, I want to have it on home because I have an at-risk friend, at-risk neighbor. As long as that pharmacist is trained, they're registered with the state of Michigan, and they give information to that person, they're allowed to give it without a prescription.
And that can't be abused.
No.
That's not
No.
something
It's
that-
not an opioid.
No, naloxone is just an antagonist.
I just
So
Yeah.
the way
It's like
the opiates work
Okay.
is, here's your heroin or whatever, the receptor is in your brain, it latches on, and it makes you feel good. And as you use it more, you develop tolerance, so you need more of the medicine to get the same effect, so people use more. The Narcan that he's talking about has a higher affinity for that receptor, and so it will bind so the opiate can't.
And then I just wanted to add, like, something that we didn't really talk about, but it's really important to mention, that what we're dealing with now isn't what we dealt with even 5 years ago. Like, it's not. So 5 years ago it was heroin, and now this is just anecdotal, like what I've heard, from people nowadays, because I haven't really been out there, but you can't get heroin anymore. Like, there's no such thing as heroin. It's all fentanyl. Like, and fentanyl will kill you almost immediately. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Narcan does not have as high of a success rate with revitalization for fentanyl overdose.
Yeah. So what he's mentioning is the same receptors that control breathing in the brain, these same receptors that opioid attaches to. But if there's too much of those opiates that attach to these receptors that regulate breathing, a person stops breathing. The problem with fentanyl and carfentanil is they're also very strong opioids. They attach to the receptor. Naloxone can't come and knock it off because it's so powerful. So there's people that I've heard needed 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 doses of naloxone to get them to come out to be able to start breathing again until they can get help. That is the problem. That's why it's so much in the news right now. So many people are dying, and he's absolutely right, is because heroin is being laced with fentanyl and carfentanil. And that's a major problem.
Didn't you have a picture?
I did. I don't have it with you, but
On
there,
it, the-
I mean,
the
you can just
amount?
explain it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like the
that's
amount,
tiny.
it shows, the picture you're talking about is, you can look it up online, it shows the amount of heroin that it would require to kill you is like a pile of sand, like a tablespoon.
Yep.
The amount of fentanyl that it would take to kill you is, I don't know, like 3 grains of sand, and then the amount of carfentanil that it would take to kill you is 1 single grain of like sand.
it's
So-
literally a speck of it can kill somebody of carfentanil. And that's true.
And you have to understand too, like, the way drug dealers do this is they're mixing it all in with their drugs, but it doesn't mix evenly. So it's like the reason a lot of people are dying, and this is straight from somebody who's been out there, is you can go get 12 packs of heroin from the same dealer, do all 11 of them and be totally fine. So you're like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna die. That 12th pack could have an imbalance of the cut agent, the fentanyl, and it will kill you immediately. So like that's why people are dying. It's not evenly distributed.
Are they cutting it to make it cheaper because it's cheaper?
Yeah, because heroin is Heroin is, I'll get political for 1 second. Heroin, 90% of heroin that's being trafficked in the United States comes from Mexico. It used to come from the Middle East, it now comes from Mexico. And because Border Patrol has become a lot stronger, heroin is harder to get across the border. Fentanyl comes from China. So you do the math.
Yeah, and also too, to smuggle it, if they're mixing heroin plus fentanyl, you might need this much powder. If they're mixing it, it's much more potent, you don't need as much powder, it's much easier to smuggle into the United States. I'll tell you, there's been some crazy stuff of what people try to do to smuggle drugs into the country.
Didn't they just catch somebody who had enough fentanyl to kill 1 million people in their car?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, they did. And in the case he's referring to, it was millions of dollars of heroin, and they had their child in the backseat, is what he's referring to. But yeah, that's the issue that we have. It's really, that's why we're seeing so much attention to this situation. So many people are dying, and if you go to emergency rooms, and you can speak to that better than I can, but there's overdoses everywhere, all the time. It just becomes a normal process. We're talking 10, 15, 20 overdoses per hour, and the whole healthcare system is getting overrun with the situation.
That's just the people that
Overdoses are
come into
routine
the
for this.
hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the people you see in the hospital.
We get, people show up at the front door, get dropped off, and we have a bell at the front door that you can, the nurses, the triage nurse will ring to, get a stretcher out there to get them back. Yeah.
So, I mean, all of the, I've done some of the research regarding all the bills that are passing in Michigan. Having, I mean, obviously Narcan, we don't want people overdosing, but it seems that a lot of the bills are targeting pharmacists or doctors or the distributors and stuff like that. And as you mentioned before, it's really up to the user themselves to decide and choose, obviously. You mentioned the mindset of an addict is not really there, but I'm wondering more, is drug court, like statistically, like, is that helping? Is that working? Because that's really going towards the actual.
The numbers say it is, and what's interesting actually is the numbers say that even people that were unsuccessful but went through drug court, like you didn't finish it, he was unsuccessful, sent to prison. Even people that started and were unsuccessful, there's a low percentage of recidivism. So getting people in, because he was in and probably participated, but it's not even so much of completing it. You want people to complete it. I have a sobriety court as well, which is alcohol, some other controlled substances, and the people that they complete it, the numbers are great. And again, even the ones that don't, because they're like he said, there's things that we do with the program as far as getting people to comply, giving them the tools, the options to try to, and the judges we don't want them. I don't look at them like criminals. These are people that have substance abuse issues. I don't think jail is a good place for them. And also the concern too is sometimes you see this. We have to be careful too. You can lock somebody up. Before they went to jail, they were using a certain amount of heroin because they built up a tolerance. They're out. They come back and they're going right back to that, and they could die. So I don't. That's always a concern. If you lock someone for 5 days or 7 days or whatever, they come out, they go right back to where they were. They don't have that tolerance. They're going to overdose, and I don't want that to happen.
I would just like to say too, like on that point, what Jamie's saying, like it's all true. From my inside perspective, I would love to see more programming inside the incarceration system, not like rehabs and stuff, but like, look, we've given you 4 chances. You messed up every single one. Now you're in prison. I would like to, if you're going to be incarcerated, there's a difference between me being incarcerated and someone being incarcerated for armed robbery,
Yes.
right?
Or
And I would
guy
like to,
who-
or murdered his
Yeah,
parents.
right.
I would like to see some sort of programming differential within the incarceration. Like, I still committed a crime. Like, I fully understand it. I violated the law. I committed a crime. However, causality, stuff like that. I would have liked to have gone to prison and had more programming options for rehabilitation instead of just a timeout behind bars.
But there was a paradigm shift. It used to be rehabilitation. You would go to jail to be rehabilitated. That whole thing changed, and all changed with the federal sentencing guidelines and all the others to punitive. So you're going to have people in power or governmental that understand it's not about punishing. Judges have to understand we're not We don't wanna punish anybody. You wanna be able to rehabilitate, to guide them, be there, help them, and not, you know, make it sound like, oh, you're nothing, you're bad.
Yeah,
Well, it's the
and
stigma.
it's the stigma.
Yeah.
I also, there has to be a lot more options. I'll give you one thing. When I got out of prison in Oakland County, if you don't have anywhere to go, there's one place to go, and it is not a good place. It's in Pontiac. It doesn't even matter what the name is. But every single non-resident, anybody who doesn't have a residence to parole to in Oakland County gets out of prison and goes to this literal trap. I mean, it's a crack. It's like, it is in downtown Pontiac, and it is garbage. And it's full of offenders. It's full of drug addicts. It is the worst place you can go straight out of prison. So I understand it's about money. It's about a lot of things. But like, as a parolee, it's not like I had a choice of where I could go. I couldn't go to my parents' house. I couldn't go here and here. So they send you to one place, and that place is really bad. But it's about money, it's about politics, it's about a bunch of things. So I'm not blaming that for anything. But like, there has to be better reentry programs to avoid recidivism.
I think too.
So again, the thing about being, what they used to call it, scared, taking kids,
So it was like scared straight,
Scared
right?
Straight.
Dare,
Scared
it was like dare, scared straight,
Right.
those things that we.
I don't think that's effective. I mean, I was in jail when they took kids in there for Scared
Right.
Straight, and we would just bark at them because it was funny. I don't think that I don't think that was effective. But yeah, it's about real change. I mean, it's.
I mean, there's an epidemic. Like,
Yeah. I think from a patient perspective, the number one thing that I always tell people is this, is that we can talk about treatment, we can talk about blame all we want, but at the end of the day, we as individual patients have to educate ourselves. You go to a doctor for a minor injury, and listen, there are people that legitimately need these medications. There's people that are going through cancer and different things that need these meds. But here's the thing, if we educate ourselves, and I see this happen all the time. Well, here's your prescription for 100 tablets of this. Well, okay. Instead of saying, you know what, doctor, let me get with you within 24 hours after my minor surgery. If Motrin doesn't work for me, and I'll get right back to you. That's the pathway we should be thinking. Instead of saying, okay, well, here's your drugs, here's your 100 tablets of Vicodin, Norco, whatever it is, that we have to own that and educate ourselves about what these drugs are to try to prevent that pathway from progressing. And it's impacting every single community in this nation right now.
Going back to the education part, within the House of Medicine, there's more emphasis on education and non-opiate ways to treat pain. So they want physicians to spend more time educating as much as here's your prescription, have a nice day, call me in a week if it, make sure you're getting better.
Just to add to that, I do think it's really important as patients that we advocate for ourselves. I know I went to the ER once and for an injury, and the ER doctor wrote me a prescription. I think it was for Tramadol, and I said, "Can you just give me like ibuprofen? I don't want that." And he's like, "Well, I already wrote it, so here it is, because you don't have to fill it if you don't want it." I ended up not filling it, but it was really frustrating as a patient because it's like I might need something that's a little bit stronger than extra-strength Tylenol, but I know I don't want that. So I think it's important just to try to advocate for yourself as a
Correct.
patient.
And your loved ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, handing somebody a prescription for Tramadol can be really dangerous.
Right.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
a pretty popular drug amongst addicts. The doctor doesn't know unless you tell him you're an addict. How would he know?
90% of the world hydrocodone, which is in Norco and Vicodin, is consumed in the United States. 90% of the world. That's a shocking stat.
Is consumed where?
In the United States.
US.
And it's even more than that.
I have a question. This is a middle school, and so I'm thinking about kids who are anxious or depressed or scared or confused. You don't want to put them on drugs, right? Or antidepressants or anxiety medication, like you said, that one gal said something about coping skills, but is there something like in elementary or middle school that helps the kids not be so risky and, they're devilish or acting out or whatever starts them?
I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak on it, but I think with mental health, and Ben, you said you kind of went through this. I mean, There's a difference between the opioids and the drugs that are gonna help with depression or anxiety. Of course, you don't wanna start young kids on medication, but if they need that, that's something they can take if it helps them in a school setting.
But isn't that kind of how they start looking?
I don't
drugs
think you can
to help
say
them?
that to treat mental illness is the same as treating addiction, because this is something completely different. You know, some parents might not want to, I see all the time in the hospital, parents don't want to put their kids on medication and they want to do therapy. So they can do therapy, you know, it's trying to figure out what works for the kids. And I think mental illness and drug addiction go hand in hand, because you're trying to treat the illness and what you said, like.
I really think
Yeah.
a huge component of this too, if you really think about it, with pain medication, a doctor's writing you a slip and then you leave and you're done. With psychotropic medication, you need to pair it with a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So when I was on psychotropic medication, I was seeing a therapist twice a week, once a week, and a psychiatrist who was monitoring.
Yes.
It's different. I mean, it's a very measured, they're asking you every time you go see them. So yeah, I do think it could be a dangerous road if you go to a general practitioner and you tell them, my kid has anxiety, and he throws a bottle of Xanax at you. But if you do it properly, and you go to a therapist and a psychiatrist, and you handle it with regimented therapy and supervision, I think it could be very effective. But I don't think it's like a Band-Aid that you can just throw at somebody.
No, I really stress, and I feel it's so important to not only be on the medication, to do the therapy, like Ben said, you see a therapist, your psychiatrist, you meet with every 3 months, or monthly, or whatever, so you're going over the medication. They're monitoring you. And I think, you know, for some people, taking that medication really, really makes a difference. It really helps them.
Those medicines work on different receptors.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree. Mental illness is a very, very big problem everywhere. I think I think there's a lot of attention that has to be put to it. I think there's a lot of people suffering that are not getting treated properly as well. But I don't think necessarily that is a path that's
Right,
maybe
no,
built
I don't.
towards.
Yeah.
No, but co-occurring disorders, mental illness plays a huge role in addiction.
Yes,
Of course.
yes.
That they're trying to find something to make them feel
Yep.
better.
Yes, to fill the sadness, to fill the void, to
Self-
be numb, to self-medicate.
Self-medicate instead of going to a professional, you try to do it yourself.
Drinking, like a lot of my patients, they come in and it's the alcohol, it's, you know, they're completely intoxicated, it's overdose, and while they're in that state, they're making suicidal statements in that moment. And then, you know, we evaluate them afterwards when they're clinically sober, so we understand what, you know, did you mean that? What are you saying? What can we help you with? Like, we'll have you see our psychiatrist, we'll come talk to you.
Is it not the same, and I'm not judging, I'm asking, is it not the same mentality that there's something wrong, so I take a pill, even if it's for mental illness, like how many, I mean, it's becoming more of like how many college students take Adderall to kind of pass the test or pass the exam that they have to, it's kind of the same rabbit hole as you said before, to go down a bad road of this mentality of, if I have an issue, I take a pill. It's a different category, but is it not dangerous in that sense?
I think that there's people that have a greater chance, it could possibly even be genetics, of addiction. It's a proven fact that there's people out there that genetics, you may be prone more to whatever type of addiction it is, whether it be alcohol and so forth. As far as those type of medications, look, I mean, you have so many college students today, and I've probably seen Adderall given more for adults and people going through college to try to excel versus children that are dealing with attention deficit disorder. So I think that there's many factors, but I wouldn't necessarily say, I think it's more of possible addictive personalities, and they're more prone to addiction than others.
Ronnie, do you see, I don't really know, and maybe you and Alex can talk about people abusing, besides stockpiling and overdosing on their psychotropic medication. I don't see a lot of abuse
Correct.
with their psych meds.
I
I don't
agree.
see that
I
at all. I
Yeah.
don't see the abuse with it.
Yeah. What I see more from my end is, even though a lot of these other drugs are not respiratory depressants per se, but I see extremely concerning prescribing habits, such as somebody comes in, bring a prescription for Norco, which has hydrocodone in it. On top of that, they'll be on Xanax, 2 milligram. And on top of that, they'll be on Ambien to help them sleep at night. And then they'll be on a drug, an Adderall in the morning to get them right back up. It's a huge roller coaster. I mean, it's just,
Didn't they
That
just
could
find-
lead to drug, I mean,
Right.
that could
Yeah.
definitely.
I mean, it's like if the doctors are not in contact with each other, if you're getting meds from, I mean, you look at, in the news, right, Tom Petty, I mean, he was on, they listed everything that he was on, and it was a lot of drugs,
yeah,
and
it is.
so
And
you have to, if you're on a psych med, you have to be following up with your psychiatrist, you have to be with your doctor, you have to know all the meds that you're on, their reaction.
The state recently started providing physicians with personal reports of how much opiates they're using, or prescribing, I should say, and then what % are you doing that in combination with other psychoactive drugs. So it's definitely becoming much more to the forefront.
Well, let's prevent people from getting heroin.
I think we're gonna try to wrap it up, maybe one last question.
Yeah,
Sure.
very on the topic you were saying about benzos and opioids. Just keep in mind that some people take those and they might add a little bit of alcohol, or they have some sort of sleep apnea, and those are the people that have an accidental overdose and go to sleep. So sometimes a doctor prescribing, it's not going to protect you. You have to educate yourself that that combination is a dangerous combination.
Well, benzos and opiates
Also,
are dangerous.
I think that technology might help us in the future. For instance, when my grandmother had dementia, we had a machine where my mom filled out medicines. So my mother has dementia now, and I got a machine after she had surgery. It was Wi-Fi enabled, and it did not allow her to take her Percocet. For really, she had to wait the 6 hours until the next dose. You can get those, are pretty expensive. Guardian Alarm has it. There's also blister packs. There's also like your monthly count, like someone can see how many pills you've taken if you regimen it out instead of having a whole bottle. There's also a timer cap that people can get for their bottles.
Obviously, she's very educated in that. She's also a nurse, by the way.
But
So,
and then we'll do, I
Get rid
always
of
tell
your
my
drugs.
patient, I always tell the patients that I deal with, you have to know what medication you're on. You
Absolutely.
have to know. If they're like, oh, the psychiatrist put me on this, and I'm like, look it up, research it, know what you're taking. You have to be in control of this all. Know the side effects, know everything, know your illness, know what's going on. Like, you are the advocate, right? You have to take care of yourself. Learn about all of this stuff.
absolutely.
So I want to thank everyone for coming in. We all give a round of applause to our panel. And before we leave, I just want to say a few things. I know we spent a lot of time talking about very heavy stuff today, and I think in the midst of this crisis, it often seems very doom and gloom. What can we actually do about this? We are here as a coalition, as a resource for the community, so we want to help whenever we can. We work in prevention, so our main goal is just to prevent this from ever happening in the future for as many people as we can. So everyone today, before you leave, please, we have a few things that you can take with you. This is a prevention tool. If you've not seen this before, this is Datira. So this is a way to properly dispose of your unused, expired, unwanted prescription drugs. You just open it up, dump your pills in, add water, seal it, shake it, throw it in the trash. It deactivates the drugs so they can't be reused, and it's safe for the water supply. You can also have, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but we have in our 3 communities that we serve, Berkeley, Oak Park, and Huntington Woods, there are prescription drug drop boxes at all 3 public safeties. So you can take your unused, unneeded, expired prescription drugs and drop them off in that box so that you don't...
No questions asked.
No questions asked, so that you don't have it in your medicine cabinet, because that's often where it can be an issue. And I'm sure, Ben, you can attest to this. When people leave it, it can be found, it can be misused. So you want to make sure that you dispose of it properly, and you also want to make sure that when you're using it, that you're storing it properly. so that someone can't come in and go to the bathroom and take your medicine and you not know that they did that. A couple other quick announcements too. If you did not sign in when you came in, please sign in before you leave. We are trying to get everyone's email address. We're going to be sending out a survey after this, and also some more information about some upcoming events. We have our Youth Dialogue Day coming up on March 23rd. We do it every year with students, high school students in Berkeley and Huntington Woods. Dana, who was here earlier, was talking about protective factors. This is a way to help engage our youth, get them talking about issues and concerns and coming up with solutions, along with adult leaders in the community. So we always are looking for participants for that. We're going to send out some information on that. Additionally, to sort of lighten the mood, we have a fundraiser coming up called Laughter is My Drug on February 25th at Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle in Royal Oak. We are selling tickets for those today. They're $20 each, so if you'd like to buy a ticket, we can sell you one, or you can get it on our website as well. And then on April 22nd, just save the date, we have some save the dates out for our Health and Wellness Fair. This is the first one that we're doing. It's going to be at the Oak Park Recreation Center. It's being sponsored by the Coalition and then the cities of Oak Park, Berkeley, Huntington Woods. Also, if you can, if we have any parents in the house, we do have a parent survey. If you could take it just a few minutes and fill this out if you haven't already. And then we also have various resources, a marijuana fact card. One of the things that we also do is educate about other substances beyond heroin. Many of you may know that there is potentially going to be a ballot initiative, or there is a ballot initiative that's potentially going to be on the ballot in 2018. So this is just some information about that and some other resources, as well as our 2017-16 at a glance coalition. Anything else you want to say? All right, so again, thank you everyone so much for coming out, and if you guys don't mind staying, if anyone has some questions, lingering questions, feel free to ask. But thank everyone for coming out.
Thank you. Good, I'll do it again. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, it's great.
Dr. Manti? Dr. Manti? Dr. Manti, where are you?
Yes,
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
I don't know if I knew the response. There were like two gigantic, honestly, there's so many crafts now.
I work
Those crafts.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
Right off the
Yes.
I'm working for my friend.
Which
That's a nice program. I wish.
Okay.